Hey everybody, today we are doing an episode purely on attachment and purely on anxious attachment actually. We talked about attachment in other episodes, but I'm super excited about this one because like my favorite area is anxious attachment, and we just get to spend a whole hour digging into what it is and talking about, strategies, things like that. So to start off, I wanted to read a quote from a very famous author, W.E.B. Du Bois. Um, Talking about a concept he came up with called double consciousness. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. He goes on, but the main point about double consciousness is that for people of color in a world that has a criteria that needs to be met, his argument is that a lot of people needed to split their consciousness in two so that they could measure themselves through the eyes of the world that they were living in. So with double consciousness, one of the reasons I wanted to point that out, not just for people with black bodies, but also just all humans, people with anxious attachment really resonate with that, I think. Because with anxious attachment, all the way since childhood, you're learning that I have to look at the world through the eyes of other people. And I would even take it a step further with anxious attachment. I think that double consciousness is huge and there's so much nuances in it. But with double consciousness, once anxious attachment gets even more intense, not only do you have this sense of two souls, but you go back to one soul because you start to see the world only from the world and not yourself. It's no longer a two-ness, it's a oneness. And it gets really difficult because with anxious attachment, if you only digest the world from other people's eyes, you stop caring about what you care about. It's like oxygen is more important than the absence of oxygen. So making someone else happy is so much better than me being happy. So I like to think about that with anxious attachment and all the way to childhood to adulthood, that being something that plays in my mind. But what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I have
all
so
that?
many thoughts. I
saw your mind go like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
I think the background of race though for the quote is interesting because it's like this concept of double consciousness only arises from the demands of one's environment. It's not this naturally occurring phenomenon. It happens because someone born with skin that is going to be perceived as different automatically starts feeling this necessity of what are they thinking, there's a demand to consider someone else's perspective because there are implications of the way certain people are treated. So it's not something that comes naturally from within, it's something that comes as a demand from your environment.
Yeah.
Which I think is true for anxious attachment in general.
Yeah.
And I think people with anxious attachment generally have this fear that they were born with it, that it was like this thing that organically was in them from the beginning, when the deepest truth is no one's ever born with an anxious attachment. It's something that your environment demands you become.
Yeah, I love that because I think about, as everybody knows who's been watching a whole lot, attachment through the lens of childhood. And all the way back in the research, they talk about how it's the interactions, it's the style of parenting that first starts off the anxious attachment or any other attachment insecurity. So when I think about kids with anxious attachment or just attachment in general, kids don't start off with that. They start off as secure. And one of the ways that I like to distinguish that is secure infants, let's say you're like 1 to 2 years old, they often don't ask the question, is it possible, before they reach for something. They're like, okay, milk, I'm going to cry. Oh, I need this, I'm going to cry. But avoidant kids, for example, they slowly learn, okay, well, I don't know if my vulnerability is going to lead to nourishment. So I'm going to train myself to shut that off. And then with anxious attachment, it's I'm going to reach my hand out, and if I don't get it, I'm going to try to create as much control as possible by screaming louder, even if I don't actually feel that as dysregulated as I am letting on. I want you to think I'm at a 20 in terms of intensity instead of a 10 because I want control. And I think as adults, all the way back from childhood, what happens is you memorize that, and now your natural, actual response is physiologically a 20 instead of a 10.
Mhm.
So now it's like this unnatural sort of magnification of your experience to obtain what you want. But all the way, my mind went a million places. But all the way back to what you were saying, yes, it starts back with this lack of what you need in the moment when it comes to your attachment needs, emotional or practical.
Yeah, and it reminded me of my old roommate who was uh the context is he's black, and we when we lived in New York City, he told me this very like casual story of how he would walk through Central Park to get to his office, and it always stuck with me. Just like he's like, it's not like I'm being heckled by people as I walk through Central Park in the morning, but I do feel eyes on me in a way that feels extra. Like like I wouldn't feel those eyes. Like you're feeling this perception on you that feels unnecessary, and it creates this self consciousness. Like I'm just kind of minding my own business, walking in the morning through a park with hundreds of people, but for some reason there's something about me in particular that draws attention, and it's inevitable that you're gonna be impacted by it. How to undo the negative impacts of it is a different question. But first, validating how you came, like an anxiously attached person. I think the one of the roots of someone who's anxiously attached is they have this idea. They have this fear that relationships are inherently conditional. You know what I mean? Someone with anxious attachment, by the fact that they have to kind of exaggerate something about their expression in order to get their needs met, the implication is I need to add extra energy into any relationship in order to get my needs met, which means there's always going to be a transaction in order for me to get my needs met, which at its core is saying relationships are conditional. And that kind of really messes with your perception of love. You know what I mean?
Right. And it seems harmless at first because you're taking the role of, okay, I'm going to assume control by putting myself in a worse situation. Like, I'm going to feel comfortable in this relationship with you by making myself out to, like, how can I make sure that I make you happy? If you're smiling because I did something for you, that's okay, even if it inconveniences me, because I want to feel that sense of control that you're not going to leave me. And so that it's like you make relationships conditional at your own expense so
Just in
that you can
case.
feel good,
Just in case.
just in case.
I'm going to ruin this relationship by making it conditional just in case you might leave me otherwise.
Doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Well, you're kind of obscuring the true nature of the relationship too by just
Mhm.
like never seeing it for what it is.
Yeah.
Like I actually had a random thought that I wanted to ask you. I feel like between like an anxiously attached person and an avoidantly attached person, I feel like the anxiously attached person has more hope. Like they wouldn't be putting extra sprinkles on top of their relationships if they didn't hope it would improve it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because like when we were doing back to ADHD episode, when I was thinking about like ADHD and anxious attachment, like I was even trying to write like this caption. I talked about like anxiously attached people, especially if you have ADHD, have a ton of hope in the world because it's like you turn your attention, you know that it's like automatic that you're going to regulate by leaning on reality. It's like I have hope that by crying, like somebody's going to come to my rescue, which is the opposite with avoidant attachment, where you have a lack of hope in that way, where you're crying and your tears you think is like it's not going to strong arm somebody. That's actually weak. like they're going to use this against me if I show sadness. But with anxious attachment, it's like if I cry louder in the strange situation, that's going to get mom's attention. That's going to strong arm her because of how powerful how powerfully I trust that this person will come save the day, right?
Yeah, there's more agency in the back of your mind unconsciously if you think if I put extra effort in, I'm going to get something in return. I feel like it's funny.
Oh,
Anxious attachment is called anxious attachment, but avoidant attachment would make more sense if it was called like depressive attachment. Like
interesting.
someone with avoidant attachment tends to have a more fatalistic view of life. Like there's nothing I can do about anything. And so I'm resigned to kind of having surface level relationships. So there kind of is a depressive element to an avoidantly attached person, whereas with an anxiously attached person, right in the label is the emotional psychological experience they're having.
Yeah, you're like anxious to get something. And I
Yeah.
follow what you said. And I agree. I didn't understand at first, but like the depressive part, but it makes so much sense. Because with avoidant attachment, a big difference is you feel like there's this inorganic connection with you and this outer source of whatever. So you said, I'm just going to isolate myself and make sure that I'm fine without that thing. Because I can't reach out and extend to get it because that's away from my identity. With anxious attachment, you will sacrifice all of your identity to become what the outside wants from you. And that's bad because of this whole thing with double consciousness. You lose your identity, excessive amounts of guilt, all that. But it's positive in a sense because you have this high level of agency, like you said. Like I follow you now, like with hope. Like I can do anything. I can be anything you want me to be. And then that allows you to learn a lot of lessons from reality, of getting information. Like with anxious attachment with me is really hard because when I do social media, I get so much information from the algorithm of what people want. And so I have this constant dialogue with myself of, okay, do I edit the video this way because I know people will like it?
Funny.
Or will I keep my identity as this is what I actually like? And then I'm like, wait, do I measure how good this post was based on how many people liked it? Or based on what I actually think is good content? And that's something that I have to remind myself to instill healthy attachment in myself.
See, this is the difference between me and you. That's so funny you said that because I have the exact opposite
Oh my
approach to
gosh.
like TikTok and Instagram where I'm like, I refuse to respond in any way to something that works. Like I'm going to have this true path and I will not deviate from it. Even if everyone's like, tell us more about this thing. I'm like, no, I'm talking about hair pulling for the next 6 weeks,
That
whether
is
you like
hilarious.
it or not, which I think is a little bit of an avoidantly attached person. Like I'm resigned to accepting my fate to the algorithm as opposed to trying to manipulate it.
Right. That's so funny. We're perfect for each other.
I know, it's so funny.
that made me
You
think.
did reach out to me to hang out with me first, if you remember correctly.
That was a lot of physiological stress. I just heard you talking. I was like, I gotta hang out with you.
And I heard you talking. I was like, I gotta hang out with him, but I guess it'll never happen.
we'll see if our paths cross.
You want to hear a funny story?
Yeah.
So I got picked up from work one day with Eddie and Elizabeth, and so we're walking him, and we run into this dude who's from Louisiana, and I immediately vibe with, and like it's like this, hey, should like we hang out? But I didn't say it, and so we.
That's what he said, or that's what you said?
That's what I thought.
Oh, that's what you thought.
So I just walk away with Elizabeth and Eddie. And I go, well, I guess I'll never see him again.
Depressive attachment. You make this awesome connection. You're like, well, I wish that I could reach out to you.
Super cool dude. Anyway, I guess we're going to die and never talk to each other again.
Versus me, I'm like hanging out and I'm running into people that I know I'll never see again, and I'm already too busy. Hey, let's hang out. I'm like at the gym talking to somebody, and who knows if they're watching this podcast. But
I'm pretty sure that guy's not watching it.
he was like, oh yeah, we should do some like calisthenics here. And I was like, oh, that sounds awesome. Let's do it. What's your number? I'm like, I have no time this week. They text me. I'm like, I'm sorry, I have no time this week.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Polar opposites. I had another thought though, because I've been talking about this a lot lately with different clients, but I feel like with anxiously attached people, there's this like how do I say it right? They have this. So I find this pattern to be someone who's anxiously attached, right? They have a constant fear that someone is upset with them or that someone might be upset with them, depending on the circumstance. And so they're constantly afraid someone's upset with them. And when I ask them, like, hey, so how do you feel about like the reason they might be upset with you? And they're like, oh, I don't even think about like the interaction or if they're valid. That doesn't matter. What matters is that they might be upset with me. And it's like, well, don't you think it's interesting that you're constantly preoccupied with people being upset with you, but you're never asking yourself if their frustrations are valid? And I think it's a learned behavior with someone who is anxiously attached to disregard their own feelings about a conflict for the sake of keeping peace in the relationship. And over time, that pattern of behavior gets them into a lot of trouble.
Wow. Yes. To a T. Like, like you were saying it, I know I was like scratching my nose, but I was like, that is the problem with anxious attachment. Like a lot of people with anxious attachment don't realize they do this. It's unconscious, But with anxious attachment, you're always making yourself out to be the villain in the story. I mean, when anything goes wrong in your life, like what's your first question? It's what did I do wrong? How did I react that made this go this way? Why did I send the right text to this person? And I think the reason that you do that is because you have this automatic assumption that you play the biggest role when it comes to bad things coming your way in your life. And if you can fix that, then you can make good outcomes come your way. So like with anxious attachment, the wound is um you were abandoned as a child. So you assume that if people will abandon me, the bridge of connection is my ability to communicate and to make things work.
Your responsibility is to keep that connection going, even
Yes.
if it's at the expense of your own sense of self.
Right, exactly. And I mean, like, I feel like I'm just repeating myself from like past videos, but like who's the actual villain in your story? It's the people who abandon you.
It's also your inner critic.
Right, right. It's your inner critic, and you're telling yourself like, "Hey, I need to do better to make this work." But like, I always tell people this, but the way that you fix that is by first trying to address what you're doing right now, which is asking the question, "What did I do wrong?" That's where you start. It's not your behavior. Your performance is not what you need to change. It's your evaluation of your performance. So like if you would watch like a basketball game, Golden State Warriors, and you're like, oh well, I hope that Golden State wins, and then they lose, and you're like, oh, it's because I didn't wash my hands 5 times. You're like, well, that had nothing to do with whether this was going to work out or not. It's like the other side of the table that was the problem.
It just illustrates your inflated sense of responsibility. And you said that before. You said the word that people have this assumption that they did something wrong. And I would argue it's not that they have the assumption. It's that they have the hope that they did something wrong. It's actually kind of like they would prefer it's them. They're biased against themselves in that way. Their agenda is to see reality with the slant of it's my fault, not because it's the most clearest kind of reflection of reality, but it's because it's the most comfortable reflection of reality. It's the most familiar reflection of reality, and it's the most control that they can ever have in the situation. If they did something wrong, they can fix it. But if it's the other person, and I think this, so this is why I think so anxiously attached people, they delude themselves into a greater sense of control because the opposite is too uncomfortable for them. The idea that relationships being maintained is not completely their responsibility and it's not completely within their control. Once they really come to grips with that, I feel like they become very depressed for a little bit. It's like the next question is always like, yeah, but like, I'm like, me as a therapist, I'm like, yeah, but you don't have control over how they react. If you ask internally, am I actually responsible for this conflict? And you truly believe you're not, then you have to tell them, like, I don't agree with you. And then the next thing the client will say is, yeah, but what happens next? I'm like, you don't have control over what happens next.
Right.
And they hate that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it really is helpful, I think, to think of it like I'm picturing a spectrum now, like of the depressive attachment that you called avoidant all the way to anxious attachment, right? Like with avoidant attachment, it's this giving up really quickly because you're like, this, we just don't match. We're not organic. But then with anxious attachment, it's I build control the opposite way by knowing that I can become or do whatever it takes to get this. And so if I am guilty, like you said, I don't think about it that way that often, but it's right. It's like now I have control over this and I can make myself regulate by getting this thing. And so to meet in the middle of working through both avoidant and anxious is finding that ideal sense of agency where it's like it's not even like an ideal, but more of like it's okay if things don't match up, and yet I'm not going to minimize my desires to dream about things because I'm afraid of getting hurt.
Yes, and I agree with you. It's like a balancing. Like if you're too far on the anxiously attached side, this is kind of like a tomato, like a marinara sauce, right? You need salt, you need sugar. I mean, I think sugar, I think is necessary. But I mean, you can maybe you can use onions to replace sugar. Regardless, you need a sweet component, and you need an acidic. No, you need a salt component, and you need a sweet. My wife's listening, just shaking her head.
You're trying to impress your wife right now.
But so an anxiously attached person, they've deluded themselves too much into feeling they into feeling like they can control the outcome of relationships, right? So what's the other side of that? If you deluded yourself into too much control, you probably need to become more comfortable leaning into the powerlessness of relationships, leaning into the possibility that you don't have the ability to manufacture closeness. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So the flip side of it is if you're avoidantly attached, you have deluded yourself into too much of a lack of control. So the alternative, the other side of it would be you're going to be uncomfortable realizing that you actually have more agency in making this thing work than you realize. So knowing which direction you have to go in really is the only compass you need to actually take steps towards growth. The problem is we're pretty unaware of which direction to go in. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of unaware of what. So like, okay, an anxiously attached person, the way they become more comfortable, they need to become more comfortable with powerlessness, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean exactly? At its core, it means, can you surrender to what you don't have control over? You have control over what you say. You don't have control over how they respond.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a very hard concept to understand.
And to make it like real practical, like working through anxious attachment, that's why communicating less actually helps with anxious attachment, because you have this assumption that I need to gain control through communicating well. And that robs you from ever getting any evidence that people will be there for you in the absence of your communication, in the absence of your control. So the paradox is that if you actually let go of control, you feel that slight depression because, yes, maybe people will pull away and you have to admit that you won't be accepted. But in the middle of that, you can send a one-word text to someone and then the next day pops up and you realize, like, wait a minute, this is actually bringing them closer to me. So when you're healing anxious attachment, it really looks like, how can you learn to communicate less so that you can get more evidence that people will be there for you in the absence of your work, and more so present for you because you simply exist as a human. Like the bow that ties your relationships together and the string or the glue, whatever you want to call it, like that's you as a human and as you exist. But all the other stuff is good. It's just, it's not necessary. And so,
go ahead.
No, that's good.
You know, what's funny is I'm hearing the TikTok comments respond to you right now because we've said stuff like this before.
Yeah.
And when I post stuff like this, I hear the same response over and over again. They're like, yeah, but I know for a fact that when I stop doing as much, everyone leaves. Like that's always the response. I don't know if maybe we have different groups of people that
No, I get that.
but yeah. I always am like, yeah. So I would love to look under the hood of your life to see exactly what you're talking about. But let's pretend that you're listening to what we're saying in a very like direct and understanding way. I would argue that your idea of what a relationship looks like, maybe you're not. Here's the thing with anxiously attached people. I've noticed that anxiously attached people, they will never discriminate who they let into the social network. Like whoever their friends and family, whatever, that they keep in the inner circle is whoever shows up.
Yeah.
You know? And so they have
welcome to the party.
They do not pick and choose who they are close with. And then lo and behold, the people in their inner circle kind of suck. And it's like, because deep down, someone who's anxiously attached doesn't feel like they deserve to pick and choose. They don't have the self-worth enough to say, no, I don't actually like this vibe, and so I don't want to be around you. They let anyone in, and then when they start to stop putting effort into relationships like we're saying, all of a sudden they're like, yeah, look at all this bad shit that's happening. It's like, yeah, because you're not picking good ones.
Right, exactly. And I mean, this is really good when it comes to like dating and stuff, right? Like if you have anxious attachment in your dating, you often feel like you're stuck between two choices. Like, do I stick with this person? Let's say a guy that is filled with all these green flags. Like, do I stick with this good guy that I feel no chemistry with? Or do I go for this toxic guy that I feel extreme levels of chemistry with? And I'm like, well, there's a third option here. You're pushing away. Likely what's happening is you're attracting very like people that you're not feeling chemistry with, because those are the people you're most comfortable around. Like you're not in your head, you're not thinking, you're not putting them on a pedestal. And who wants to be put on a pedestal? So of course you don't feel chemistry. But the other toxic people, you're putting them on a pedestal. And if they're a bad person that's put on a pedestal, they'll enjoy it. So you're probably attracting a lot of avoidant people because you're putting them on a pedestal, and you're probably unattracted to people that are green flags, and you're probably scaring away all the secure guys. Because if you put someone who's secure on a pedestal, they'll probably feel like out of place, like this doesn't feel good. Just like you feel out of place when the other person puts you on a pedestal. So if you actually work through your attachment issues, you don't have to settle. Like a lot of people are like, I have to either settle for a lack of chemistry or I have to work hard I have to get hurt a whole lot by someone I feel chemistry with. But really what needs to happen is work through your attachment, build a healthy relationship with someone. And you might find that you can have that chemistry and be with the person that you want to be with. And it's going to be work and it's going to be hard and they're not going to be put on a pedestal.
It's gonna feel weird and unfamiliar. I mean, that's the thing. Those first two examples you gave, like person that you have no chemistry with versus person that you have no chemistry with that has green flags versus person you have tons of chemistry with that has red flags. It's like the reality is those are two sides of the same coin, and that coin is called familiarity. You know what I mean? And often I would say 9 times out of 10. The person that you're dating that's toxic, that you have a lot of chemistry with, you're particularly drawn to the fact that there is no future. It's very comfortable to be attracted to someone where there is no stakes, where there is no chance that there's a lifelong kind of connection. I mean, there's a safety in knowing that there's a safety in knowing that the person you met on vacation stays wherever you left them.
Yeah.
You know, so of course there's an opportunity for chemistry because it's an opportunity to be vulnerable temporarily, which at its core is not very vulnerable at all.
Yeah. Like you're saying that for the anxiously attached person.
Yeah, I think an anxiously attached person, when they go to fucking Bali, I guarantee you they're gonna find their soulmate, but then 3 months later, I don't know what happened. It's like, yeah, what happened was you had an environment where you finally felt comfortable to let your guard down. And the second it no longer was that environment because you have to go back to reality was the second it just didn't feel right anymore. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
you're right. I think this is another thing that is really connected to that, but your inner versus outer circle, like you were talking about before, I think that plays a huge role because with anxious attachment, it's positive view of others, negative view of self. So what happens when you're with someone that doesn't choose you? You automatically think that's on the other side of the looking glass. I'll get mastery if I get that. But if you're on vacation and you meet somebody and they are really attractive and you're like, oh, this is awesome. You meet them and you get close really quickly. At first you're feeling all that euphoria. You're like, wow, I'm finally getting mastery. But then the moment that they become yours and are consistent in your life, you identify with them and you say negative view of us, positive view of the world. And so then you look at your inner circle and it seems really crappy. And I think there's another factor in the mix too, which is with anxious attachment, if you do want to pull somebody in your circle, it's all about what do you need? How do I meet those needs so I can get you? And then once you get them, you find that you're with a person that knows nothing about what you want or need. And so now not only do you see negative view of your inner circle, but also now this person who is your inner circle doesn't really care about your needs, or maybe they just don't know, you know? So there's just all these things that makes it so that with anxious attachment, your inner circle sucks and your outer circle is something that you'll always want to obtain.
Yeah, that makes me, as you're talking, I'm just thinking of like, I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone with anxious attachment. I feel like someone with anxious attachment at their core, as they're looking at the people around them, they feel this danger, you know, like people are dangerous, you know, people are at their core a threat to my sense of well-being. Therefore, I need to do something to neutralize the threat. I need to make sure that you're okay, and then the threat's neutralized. But until I know that, until you reassure me that the threat is neutralized, I'm going to keep my eyes peeled for any mild change in behavior that will indicate something bad's about to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's partly why, like you said, when it's dangerous because other people feel negatively around you, right? And I think, like I said before, deep in the shadow of anxious attachment is anger. So when somebody's mad at you,
By
that
the way, that sounds
feels,
like such like a Black Sabbath lyric.
oh
Deep
yeah,
in the shadows of
deep
anxious
down in the shadow
attachment
of anxious attachment
is
is
anger.
anger. Yeah, start breaking the equipment. But it just ended there. No, but like if somebody's mad at you with anxious attachment, you feel like you failed. There's no validation of reality on your end of the equation because again, you are always the villain in the story. So if somebody's mad at you, that feels bad because anger is sort of the emotion that sets boundaries. And for someone with anxious attachment, boundaries feels like abandonment. Distance feels like abandonment. So what if you get angry at somebody else? Then you start to feel guilty because now you're like, oh, wait a minute. Now I've abandoned them. This distance has been really bad. But what you have to learn with anxious attachment is you have a very unique view amongst, other people with anxious attachment, what anger actually feels like for you and other people. You have to challenge the belief that distance is abandonment. And you have to really realize that this distance between you and the other person might not be a boundary completely, but also a gateway to more connection.
Mm-hmm. And just going back like 10 seconds to what you said before, like about the anger thing, I feel like people with anxious attachment have such a love-hate relationship to their own anger because think about it, right? Anger is like this naturally occurring thing that comes into us when we feel upset with someone else. Like I'm frustrated with you because of something you did, right? But because being frustrated with someone else inherently threatens the relationship, someone with anxious attachment, when they feel that anger come up, is going to have a very mixed experience about expressing it. They're like, if I express this, I'm creating more threat in my life. And so that's why I feel like the word people pleaser, like the phrase people pleaser, is often used in replacement of anxious attachment because there's a lot of crossover between the two. What does a people pleaser do? They're never angry. Why are people pleasers never angry? Because if they were angry, they would be threatening their social environment and they can't do that. So instead, they will suffer in silence, making sure everyone's happy, even though they might be upset with other people because it's too much of a threat for them to express themselves. I don't want to risk the chance of hurting this relationship. So any anger I feel about your behavior is going to be suppressed in order to maintain something that I'm not even sure I like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's automatic. It's habitual at some point. But it is not altruistic. You're trying to maintain safety, and it feels good. Like, oh, this person gave me a compliment. We're good, right? But I think, yeah, you have to with anxious attachment, you have to realize that the goal of relationships is not to just make other people happy. To being a people pleaser.
Well, yeah,
And,
yeah.
and I mean, with anger, it's like you feel that, like you said, and then you're trying to figure out what to do with those emotions. But with people pleasing, you don't you in a sense it's like you start off, I think, at some point with anxious attachment, knowing what you're doing, like, oh, I want to consciously like make this person want me. But then at some point you start to forget along the way, and it's so habitual, and you forget that anger is even an option. Like you feel the anger, but you forget that judging the other person as the problem is even an option. You forget that you can walk away from an interaction, leaving the other person not feeling happy. You're like, that's the goal, right? But it doesn't always have to be. And so a lot of people with anxious attachment that I work with, I remind them like having them disappointed with you is sometimes a healthy outcome that we ought to strive for. And he's like, wait, what? I can walk away with them being disappointed. Like, why would I want that? Like, why would I not want to drink water? But you have to remind them that you can turn it off. This started somewhere. It's so habitual. You don't even realize it's an option to say no.
And then this is the salt you need in this soup, to even out the taste of it. With someone with anxious attachment, it's like you need more anger, like always. Like it, obviously, anger is neither good nor bad, but in this circumstance, it's necessary for you to stop abandoning yourself too. Like I feel like one image I have, like I feel like I have many images of anxious attachment, but one of them is someone who is sitting on like a bucket with no money and begging people to give them money and food so that they can survive. Meanwhile, in the bucket is money and food. They're just unwilling to look because they're so desperate for other people to acknowledge their suffering before they can address it, rather than acknowledging it themselves. Acknowledging it themselves makes them feel selfish. And so it's almost like they need permission to drink water from someone else, or they're going to die of thirst, even though they're holding a cup.
I love that analogy, and ouch. Because it is hard to notice, because you're so used to looking external, and you convince yourself, you lull yourself into this reality, which can be stimulating sometimes, that there's something out there that's going to feel good. You love Disney movies that talk about, I can go the distance, right? With Hercules, you're like, oh man, on the other end of this, I'll be understood and accepted. But I've never run into one person that's finally made it through that journey except Hercules. Like, you're never going to feel perfectly understood unless you find yourself as well in the equation. This might be a little random, but this might also be,
No, I love random.
this might be a good exercise for me too. But like, with anxious attachment, healing it, I think, looks like you got to stop reading the comments under Instagram videos. Like, because I do that all the time.
I like how you're talking to yourself right now.
Right. I'm like, yeah, you gotta stop doing it. Cause if you want to heal anxious attachment, you have to learn how to trust internal sources of information rather than external sources of information. So I get the sense of like someone who has anxious attachment, who's on social media, looking through videos. What happens is you see something that you have this initial thought about, you watch it, and then you have this reaction that you don't fully digest. You're like, oh, I think I feel this way about this video. And then you want to validate it by looking at the captions. Then you see somebody else that says something that relates to what you think. You're like, yes, okay, exactly. So with anxious attachment, I bet there's a lot of people out there that get this sense of, oh, this is true of reality only after somebody else validates it. So with anxious attachment, the issue is that you don't trust your own reality testing, and you slowly lose it. And so as an exercise, I would say, if you have anxious attachment and you're watching, try watching a video on Instagram and don't look at the comments, something you're really interested in, and see what it feels like to just either keep scrolling or put your phone away. Like, that's going to feel slightly weird, but I think that's how you start to rebuild that relationship with yourself that you've lost. That you can actually have your own opinion about something, digest it, think about it, and that's enough. And just think, wait, who am I? Who is this person that watches this video? I have this reaction. Who cares if a million people disagree with what I think? It's irrelevant information.
There's nothing wrong with seeking feedback, but if you find the pattern of behavior is you're seeking it too much in your external world, then you have to calibrate down, And I feel like this is a classic thing with someone who's anxiously attached. Pretend like your stomach starts to hurt when you're driving and you pull into the nearest whatever and you use their restroom, right? But the only spot available was like a handicap parking spot, right? And for some reason, you start to feel guilty about that, and you go home to your significant other, and you're not entirely sure how you feel about that, but you're worried your significant other is going to judge you for doing that, right? And so you tell them, seeking to see how they're going to respond to it. And they go, oh, well, it was an emergency, so that makes total sense. And then all of a sudden, magically in your head, you go, yeah, you know what? It wasn't a big deal, right? But the truth is you felt that way the whole fucking time. You just didn't give yourself permission to even look at how you felt until someone said, go for it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I think it's why are you smiling?
Because it's like, you know what I mean? I'm like, you're literally just describing me in my unhealthy state. Like, babe, what do you think about this? I'm like, was I wrong for doing this? Was I right for doing this? And when she says yes or no, I'm like, thank God.
I feel like I'm a little bit. I feel like one of the ways in which my clients relate to me the least is I'm a little bit of an alien in the sense of like knowing something just internally and not needing a single person to validate
You're
it.
a strange animal.
but
That's healthy.
But it's a training, It's you have to have access to the part of yourself that knows something prior to thinking about the way the world might respond to it. And I think that's a really it's a pathway you have to get used to. And if your instinct is what do people think, you're going in the exact opposite direction of knowing what that pathway is.
Yes. And I mean, a question that I'm sure is popping up for a lot of people, and this is something I prepared, but if like, what about people that also have ADHD trying to navigate a neurotypical world? Like I'll say if you have ADHD and anxious attachment, it becomes really hard to navigate anxious attachment because one of the ways to heal anxious attachment is to learn how to trust internal information over external sources too often. But with ADHD, being neurodivergent, living in a neurotypical world, you can get a lot of negative consequences for just listening to your gut and things like that, and trying to, so it's helpful to look to your neurotypical peers, not to fit into the neurotypical world, because the neurotypical world is not like, oh, that's the ideal, but more so just so you don't get negative consequences every day. And so what I'll tell a lot of people that have anxious attachment and ADHD is, while yes, you might not necessarily have the same information as neurotypicals, you have an incredible ability when it comes to your intuition. Like, your intuition is so incredible, and people see you operate when it comes to things like once there's less structured activities and you're just in the zone, there's stuff that you can do. Like if you feel like somebody is bothering you or doing something that is not like cool, and your gut is just like hurting and you don't know why, like that's information that a lot of people don't get that quickly. Like, there's something happening that the other person is doing. Trust that, call them out, and lean on that, because that's going to be where you heal your anxious attachment. Trust that energy, because your gut is telling you something that you've seen before that your mind hasn't picked up yet. So you can work towards it that way while still leaning on like neurotypical information that could be helpful too.
I that's so 100% accurate. I mean, and also as you're talking, I'm like, oh my God, is my niche ADHD / anxious attachment? Because I'm just like counting clients. I'm like, this one, that one, this one. But the truth is it's kind of my niche, because it's the whole goal of that kind of therapy is like you said, it's being able to trust your kind of unfiltered gut. And I think the problem, okay, so if that's the goal, then what's keeping people from getting to the goal? Why do people have a hard time trusting their gut? It's because they have this belief they're unaware of, which is, I actually don't think my first reaction is a raw reaction. I think my first reaction is already corrupted by things that make me not be able to trust it. And my response would be, if you truly look at the sequence of events, of what happens when you gut react to something, followed by your stuff getting in the way of you seeing it clearly, it's more often that trajectory where your first instinct is like pure, unadulterated, this is how I feel. But then all of a sudden, very quickly, your identity gets wrapped up into it, and you're like, should I be feeling this? I don't know. And then you kind of lose track of what you felt from in the beginning. And it's like, if you can just recognize that there is a moment before you start personalizing your feelings, so going, oh, but is it okay if I feel this? Like, of course it is. You're not choosing it. You know, no one's choosing to feel anything. You're not choosing to dislike a restaurant. You know, you just don't like the food. Yeah. And the belief you have that the extent to which you believe you're choosing how much your taste buds are influencing your decision is the extent to which you don't trust your gut. That's really what it comes down to.
And you actually believe it, right? Like, you're like, oh my gosh, like you literally don't have a moment of thinking, I might be trying to gaslight myself.
You know what? That is what it is, though. And just title of the book, Gaslighting Myself. It's like a picture of you. It's a picture of you kind of like cross-legged. I don't know why, but I'm seeing a parrot on your
phone. Oh, like you like more cross-legged, like all the way up.
I was thinking like kind of like laying on your stomach like this.
I want to be like half asleep in the cover, like, you know, like a baby.
What if like the covers are like up to here and you're gaslighting? But gaslighting yourself is the best way to describe it. You're gaslighting yourself into feeling like the emotions you're having are wrong. Like, that's like saying the color of the sky is wrong. Like, what do you mean wrong?
Yeah. It's like, I mean, that could also be helpful in people understanding like why people with anxious attachment end up in relationships with avoidantly attached people a lot, because you're gaslighting yourself a whole lot, and then you get in relationships and wonder like, oh my gosh, like, why do I keep getting gaslit by these people? And a lot of times it's because you've been treating yourself that way, and now you run into a relationship where someone else is doing, and it feels familiar at first. But then, of course, once anger builds up and you start to call it out, you're like, wait a minute, this isn't right, that's when you blow up and then you finally have enough. But if you could notice that earlier, if you could I like some of the posts you do, but it's like you talked about you slowly start to lose the path of your footprints at some point. If you could like work backwards, and I think that's what people are kind of looking for right now. Like I'm noticing also like with a lot of posts, not that I'm just serving the the algorithm, but it's in some
Ooh,
ways I
ooh.
am. Like a lot of people are aware of what has happened and they learn from us even more cool stuff to become aware about. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is this, that with anxious attachment, you have a starting point as secure. You walk down this path that's both it's habitual in nature. You move away and you change your whole natural neural chemistry. And you end up at this point and you lose track of your footprints of where you started. And now a lot of people are very interested in, well, how do I heal it? How do I get my neural chemistry to start working again? And you have to re-gaslight yourself in the opposite direction. Because if you tell someone anxious attachment, like stop magnifying your issues to get people to come to your rescue. Like, I'm not magnifying anything. You're like, they're not. So as a therapist, you have to realize they're not actually magnifying right now. But in order to get back to where they started, in a sense, they have to minimize to get back to where they left. To get back to Eden. I just threw that in there to sound cool.
You're talking about recalibrating. Like any
Yep.
instrument that is, if it's 70 degrees in this room, but the instrument's saying 75, it's going to have to be adjusted to think it's colder in order to get an accurate reading.
Right.
You know what I mean? That doesn't mean it is colder. It means that your instrument is off and therefore it needs to be slightly modified to work accurately. There's
Exactly.
nothing wrong with that. I mean, but it's also like like you were saying, someone with anxious attachment, they're I mean, I feel like someone with anxious attachment, one of their biggest issues is because they're so focused on accommodating other people's needs, they lose track of their own self, right? Like they lose a sense of self in the process. They literally abandon themselves repeatedly in order to maintain relationships with others because they have this unconscious belief that you must do that in order to maintain relationships, right? So because they abandon themselves, they actually lose a solidified sense of self. They lose that, and now all of a sudden you're in a relationship with someone you don't like, and you have found yourself in that position because you didn't think you deserved anything better. You know, what kind of person ends up with someone they don't like? Someone who doesn't think they deserve to like someone. It's
Mm-hmm.
like it kind of like it reverse engineers itself.
Yeah, exactly. And then that person can become even more of what you don't want because you don't ask. You have all these desires for what you want in a relationship, and you're like, well, I can't be someone that asks someone to do something for me because I don't want to be a burden or
I'm
inconvenience.
not worthy enough to ask.
And so then that person never gets a good read on what you actually like. And sometimes, let's say all right, my therapist told me to try to like assert my needs and my boundaries more. I'm going to tell my partner like what I want. And you tell them like, hey, I want to go I want to go hiking more with you. I want to be healthy more with you. I want to, I don't know, whatever. And then they respond like super defensively and they're like, see, I told you it didn't work. I'm like, no, that's part of the process. Like sometimes you're going to speak what you want. Somebody's not going to like it very much. And almost like a cat that you kick, it's going to land on its feet, but it's going to remember that you kicked it.
Hmm.
And so then you get to be vulnerable and figure out what's going to happen because that person has the choice to say, I don't want to do that with you. And they also have the choice to say, yeah, sure, I will do it with you. And that's basically where you start to bridge relationships. At least you gave it a chance, you know?
But even in that moment, what you're describing is the recalibration of the most fundamental thing that's occurring, which is if anxious attachment is all about you trying to regulate your distress through anxiety, like, okay, I feel like relationships are going to crumble unless I put a lot of effort in. Okay, I'm going to be super anxious about it and delude myself into think I have more control than I actually do, right?
Mhm.
So you're constantly trying to delude yourself into overestimating your amount of control in relationships. And so when you do things like what you're saying, what the reality is telling you back is, hey, actually your control ends right here. And I think a lot of times when people come to terms with that, they can feel a bit sad. Like, wait a minute, this might not work out with this partner of mine. Like, no, it won't. It might not fucking work out. But the point is you're recalibrating your perception of what's within your control. And ultimately, if you take this to its ends, you will feel less anxious in the long run, because now you don't feel like when things fall apart, it's your fault. You know?
Exactly. Yeah. Like if you can learn to tolerate misunderstandings, for example, then that's going to work towards healing your anxious attachment, because that's where you start trying to control things too much. You're like, I can't leave any room for there to be a misunderstanding, because those misunderstandings, those are the holes in the ship. But really, in reality, that's a misconception. If you can tolerate misunderstandings with other people that you are in loving relationships with and not fill the holes in the ship, then you're going to slowly get evidence that your relationships can thrive outside of you having to constantly be on the same page as someone. You'll learn that the glue that maintains your relationships is not your ability to communicate, not your ability to make sure nobody's on a separate page than you, but more so simply your ability to exist with other people. And then over time, people are going to come to your rescue more than you think. They're going to not abandon you. Even they're not going to abandon ship. I had to say that because of the analogy. They're not going to abandon ship because they want to be with you.
They're not going to walk the poop deck.
They're not going to walk the poop. They might walk the poop deck. They might leave you, but you have to be willing to gamble in relationships, because if you don't gamble and you try to make sure everything, then you're going to end up looking like Joe Goldberg in relationships.
Who?
Joe from You ever watch that?
No.
That's the one show you haven't seen.
We've never seen a shared show.
That's crazy.
Except for MacGruber.
I just knew that if I knew of a show, you would have had to seen it. But Joe is like a stalker.
No, I don't watch stuff like that.
It's so cool, man.
I watch better shows.
Nah, man, this is good stuff.
Wait, oh man, you were saying something. We're so on the same page about this, because I feel like a lot of times with clients who are anxiously attached, one of my biggest recommendations to them in relationships is like, hey, I don't want you to resolve this conflict. I kind of want you to be annoyed around this person and not try to resolve it with words, and just kind of let it slowly end. And then the next day you just move on with your life, right? And you know, it's so funny. Our minds are so funny, because sometimes what they'll say is, so I told my partner that I'm going to try and let it resolve on its own. I'm like, you just destroyed the whole exercise, because you gave them the whole point. Like, the whole point is that they don't know.
Exactly. They have to have the chance to, not know. And then that,
I'm telling them, I told them that I'm doing this thing in therapy. I'm like, that defeats the purpose.
Yes. You have to act it out. but that's similar.
The uncertainty that they can't handle.
We do the same stuff. Like that's the stuff I love. Like the habitual changing and training of these things to get you to do these workouts, right? Like I'll say, like if you have anxious attachment and you're working to do some habitual healing, like say something in a relationship that leads to feelings of guilt as a result of a boundary that you set that might have been pretty healthy. And if you feel guilty, that's likely a good practice. Just like you said before, let guilt be your guide. And if you can tolerate that feeling of guilt, then that'll slowly teach you that you don't necessarily have that much responsibility or control. Like with anxious attachment, you really feel like I have to make sure that other people like me, or that I'm not an inconvenience to other people. And you don't trust your boundaries. You have to like check them with other people. So if you set a boundary with someone, then you're going to feel completely guilty, because now you're like, oh man, I really abandoned this person, and I don't know if they're going to stick around after I abandon them. So now I need to bridge that connection. But that's more so because that's how you think. You assume that if a boundary is set, then distance is abandonment. But it's not the case. It's actually just an assumption on your part. So allow the guilt to exist in you so that it can slowly be proven wrong. That in relationships, you'll say, hey, I didn't like that you did this. And then you'll just be like, okay, And then you're like, wait, what? They didn't like, I didn't die when they disagreed with me.
And of course they would think what you were saying though, is they would feel responsible, because I feel like of course you feel responsible, because then it's you who's to blame if something all of these thoughts, which feel very organic, are kind of almost reverse engineered based on one belief, which is I need to do a lot to keep relationships going. If you have that fundamental belief, of course you're going to feel responsible. But just because you feel responsible doesn't mean you are responsible. And I think with anxious attachment, it's like, if you really want to work on your anxious attachment, here's one way to really work on your anxious attachment, and you don't have to do anything but this. Every single time you feel responsible for anything, challenge if the intensity of responsibility is appropriate. And I guarantee you, if you add up the sum total of times you do that, you are feeling way more responsible than you actually are, given the circumstance.
I love that. That's good. That's
Also,
my favorite stuff.
Also, let guilt be your guide.
That was good.
It's me on a book cover with like my hands like in prayer, like, and then like the like Jesus halo.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple of lambs. Maybe a couple lambs in the background.
Yeah, that's a good combination of opposites. You like let guilt be your guide. You know, just Jesus.
Well, okay, I told you I was reading that book. It's like the book of Jesus for believers and non-believers. And what I like about it is it kind of talks about like if you take away the religious part of Christianity and just look at like the things he says, right? Everything he says is like super subversive. It's like even nowadays, like I'm sure a lot of Christians are like, yeah, you know, turn the other cheek. None of them actually do that though. Like, he who's without sin cast the first stone, or you know, don't judge, or you'll be judged too. A lot of Christians are super judgy. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No, a lot of people don't abide by those things.
No.
And I like that when you look at Jesus' teachings, they all sound like really good for cyclical maladaptive patterns, like to challenge, right? Like turn the other cheek.
That's why they killed him.
Yeah. Like this dude's too good. If we get good, they're gonna crucify us. That's dark.
That's our final act. It'll be live streamed on YouTube.
You're gonna be the one of the sinners on the cross. No, that's so cool, man. But
I think that. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I would love to read that book too, just to see.
You might not like it because like the first chapter is all about how like based on the time he was probably looked at in his community as a bastard child, which probably informed the way he viewed himself and the shame he had.
Oh, I'd love to learn that.
It was written from the perspective of like Zen writers, so they're more like Eastern philosophy.
I see. Yeah,
I do think that like I think at its core, if you've got anxious attachment, you know. You can't grow, you can't heal, and you just have to accept your lot in life.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when you fall, you got to just fall forward. But with anxious attachment, you got to fall backwards.
I do think.
Are we about to do the Will Smith rap? That would be so embarrassing.
I feel like you have it ready, like locked in the back of your head.
I don't think I can do it. Like I feel like there's a part of me that can do it, but it's the anxiously attached Jacob that would do it.
You know what? I would say.
Actually,
don't do it. Don't do it, Jacob. Do you have any last kind of thoughts before we switch gears?
Stay in school. Don't do drugs.
I mean, I would suggest do drugs.
Yeah, I mean with Vinny.
I'm pro drugs. With Vinny. Do drugs with me.
And if you're one of Vinny's clients, ethically you shouldn't be doing drugs. But just a heads up, if that's the case.
I mean, legally it's fine.
I mean, I think I love shadow work, so I guess if
Can I actually say something real about drugs though?
Go ahead. You're insane.
And let me say something real about drugs.
Go ahead.
Because look, Louis C.K. once said this. He was like, drugs are so good they will ruin your life. Like that's how good they are, right? Like so there's something about drugs that are appealing. Hence the fact that many people use them. But what I would argue is like, drugs will let you visit peace, but you'll never be able to stay there. You know what I mean? Like drugs give you, especially for people who have traumatic history, drugs are attractive because it's sometimes the only thing that gives you this feeling of, wait a minute, I can feel kind of centered and at peace. But the problem is that over time, it becomes a lot harder to access that state of mind. And because you're using a substance to get there, it's often you're given a visitor pass, but there's no residency with this method of getting there. And that's why I think drugs are what becomes this glimpse into a sense of peace eventually becomes this barrier to peace at the same time. So that's why I think doing drugs is interesting, because you wouldn't have this insight of like, oh, I actually can't get there this way.
Interesting. I actually feel the exact same way. Like, no jokes. Like, I've thought about that a lot, and I've seen people talk about their experiences, and I'm like, there's this place of like nirvana or something that you get to, but you take this shortcut, but then and it's fun and it's cool, but it's not. It's like a portal that you go back out of, and then you don't get to revisit it in the same way the next time. But it's also sometimes helpful. I know some people change their whole lives based on using drugs and those experiences, but anyways, yeah, just a lot of stuff I resonated with.
But my point is like you said, it's a portal, but it has diminishing returns over time, and if you truly start to believe the only way I can feel a certain way is if I use this thing, what you've convinced yourself of is I don't have all of the raw materials myself to get there. And that is the belief that will keep you the most stuck in life,
Wow.
in my opinion.
Wow.
Anyway,
No,
you
that's
know,
good.
classic end to talking about anxious attachment is doing drugs.
Doing drugs. Cool.
You want to take a quick break and then we'll switch gears?
Let's do it.
Okay, I gotta
Yeah.
use the restroom real quick.